Nasi, you can go live.
All right, thank you, sir. A very warm welcome to day 2 of the virtual conference on the right to breathe clean air, health and environment related sustainable development goals. This is a conference hosted by Symbiosis Law School, Pune, a constituent of Symbiosis International Deemed University, and sponsored by the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute. Over the past couple of days, we have been experiencing a rich exchange of academic and scholarly deliberations and action plans on the theme of the conference from internationally renowned scholars, judges, legislators, and jurists. So to continue with this, we will now begin with the second plenary session of the conference. Our esteemed guests on the virtual dais today include the conference director, Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, a Fulbright Scholar, Director, Symbiosis Law School, Pune, and Dean Faculty of Law, Symbiosis International Deemed University. Honorable Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal, Chairperson of the National Green Tribunal, India. Dr. Margot Herbert, Canada Research Chair, Tier 1 of Climate Change, Energy and Sustainability Policy, Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. Dr. Anil Kumar Gupta, Resilience and Sustainability Strategist, Professor at National Institute of Disaster Management, India. And last but certainly not the least, Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay, founder of Enviro Legal Defense Firm. Each of these speakers of the plenary session have been allotted 20 minutes to present their views on the themes of the plenary, and it will be followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. The overall themes of this plenary session are environmental justice, constitutional law and right to air, green economy, sustainable food, and right to clean air. So to introduce the theme this evening, it is my pleasure to invite the conference director, Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, ma'am. Dr. Gurpur is a former member of the Law Commission of India and an awardee of the Karnataka government's annual Kittur Rani Chennamma Award in 2018-19. She is a member of the Curriculum Development Committee of the Bar Council of India, the Academic Council of National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, member of the IALS Global Law Deans Forum, and member of the MCCIA Corporate Legislation Committee for the years 2020 to 2022. With more than 26 years of teaching experience, ranging tenures from NLSIU Bangalore to University College Cork, Ireland, Dr. Gurpur is listed as one of the 100 legal luminaries in India by LexisNexis. She has 72 scholarly articles and research papers, 2 co-authored books, and 12 book chapters to her credit. She is a distinguished member of the editorial board of LexisNexis Butterworth's Journal of IPR by CSIR, Law and Policy Journal, Dublin, Ireland, and the Polish Law Review. It is my honor, ma'am, to invite you to introduce the themes for this plenary session.
Our respected and esteemed panelists, Honorable Justice Goyal sir, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this very special and the last plenary of this Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute grant-supported rich international deliberation on the issue of right to clean air. I take the privilege of introducing the themes as Professor Lasya in her comparing introduction has already stated. We are combining 4 themes which are divided into 2 different tracks. And the key theme is right to clean air. And around that, right to breathe clean air. Around that, we are going to weave the 2 concepts. And first concept is going to be about the way in which the sustainable dimension and the environmental justice dimension is highlighted. And second is going to be the most important one, the right to sustainable food and the economy aspects. Now, if we are looking at the very concept of environmental justice, as far as India is concerned, we have had the public trust doctrine dominate. We have had the preventive approach. We have had the remedial approach dominate. Within the preventive approach, we have had the precautionary principle coming out in terms of uncertainty of the scientific evidence, in terms of adverse activities not going ahead. And then we have had the proximity the principle in terms of waste management highlighted in our regulations and approaches. However, the judicial approach in India has more or less combined all these doctrines depending on the case in order to bring environmental justice. Aside from that, we have had the legislative dimension where we have had the Clean Air Act of 1981, which has looked at prevention of pollution. We have had the Clean Air Ordinance, which came mainly in the north and central region, NCR area around Delhi and the neighborhood, especially in the context of high amount of pollution, looking at the particulate matter reduction by 20 to 30% and pollution being reduced in different cities in the country. So our Environment Protection Act of 1986, which gave the power to the government, also imposed a duty. However, just like Canada, we have the provincial government and the federal government sharing this responsibility or being concurrently responsible. However, it is the judicial initiatives which have put the right to breathe in the sense that human-centric or anthropocentric right to breathe clean air in the center. We have had very interesting cracker cases, means the Pataka cases or the cases which came before the Supreme Court in terms of conflict between right to life in terms of clean environment and the right to burst crackers or the cracker industry selling crackers in furtherance of its fundamental freedom to exercise trade or profession or business. Now, it is here that Supreme Court was very clear about the principle of human dignity in terms of healthy life under Article 21 being put in the center. That's where I saw life and livelihood directly clashing when it came to the question of right to clean environment, particularly right to clean air. Now, this was informed by the sense of what we see even in the pandemic context, when we suddenly saw Indian cities having very low level of pollution, adding, the air becoming very clear, and even the vision of the Himalayas becoming clear from thousands of kilometers in Jalandhar. So the photos were going viral in WhatsApp about the lockdown period resulting in clean air. However, in comparison to the Canadian approach, where the executive and legislature and the judiciary have been approaching it in terms of transport, in terms of climate change, in a very integrative approach to environment. In India, I see it is more of a piecemeal approach, and our legislations are, our ordinance requires more tooth. We need a very comprehensive legislation. We need to move from our 1981 Act, which is set in a different context in the let us say, Environment Protection Act of 1986. Pre means at that time we saw air, water, pollutions as in a piecemeal manner. We had a separate legislation to regulate it. So time has come to look at them as comprehensive subjects interconnected. As E.O. Wilson, the Harvard biologist, the Nobel laureate, said that environment is about different elements integrated or interconnected. It is in this context that Canadian approach in terms of issues other than contamination through smoking in public, through the transport system, the air regulation in the context of transport system, which has been taken seriously, the energy consumption, the issue of carbon taxation, carbon footprints, and carbon trade-offs, which are very highly put in the center of Canadian legislation, in the center of EU approaches. I think India has got to go far in terms of that. Taxation regime and also disincentives, incentives, trade-offs in terms of greenhouse gases and carbon footprints is something we could look at. Encouraging renewable energy is something that we could look at. We have got here our esteemed panelists from that point of view. Yesterday, we had the International Energy Agency's representation addressing this conference. So, connecting to the sustainable food also, the same concept of carbon trading, air, clean air labeling coming to the food, just like how we had general green labeling, it has to take into consideration the clean air labeling and informed choices and decision making. Now, what we saw in India was something similar to what Europe witnessed. We had almost a 5 billion reduction in the wheat production due to the ozone precursor chemicals coming in the soil, especially the nitrous nitric oxide, nitrous oxide compounds, nitrogen compounds, because of the ozone layer depletion. So the interconnectedness of this has not been explored. In agriculture, we have both the dimensions, or in the food. One is the cyclical way in which the food production adds to the perils of unclean air, and then clean air, unclean air resulting in a kind of reduction in crop or reduction in harvest. Aside from that, some of our practices of using chemicals and pesticides and supplements have also been responsible for emitting greenhouse gases, or in a way creating imbalance in the environment. So our policy, our approach to justice needs to be much more comprehensively done, although our judiciary could be always commended, including our new mechanism of green tribunal could be always commended for upholding this environmental justice and environmental ethic in a very comprehensive way. Huge fines being imposed even on religious organization when they were conducting meetings and polluting the river water. But then unless the executive orders have to, like for example, we have the new environmental impact assessment legislation. It is more in the form of a draft, and it is the one which is becoming a questionable one, because it is ex post facto. Somebody can, if somebody has already started operation, then they can always have a way of correcting it by paying the fine. And here, the strict approach in terms of 6 monthly reviews in the previous regulation has been replaced with 1 year review. So it has been in a way diluted. Therefore, our own approach in India and the approach in Canada, approach in Europe could be compared very well in order to get the best practices, because as a developing nation, we hanker after development, all right. But can this development be at the expense of environment? And can this development be at the expense of the environmental justice, which is looking at both preventive, which is looking at, let us say, protective, it is looking at the public trust doctrine. So how do we move further is going to be an important question for this plenary, as well as the two parallel tracks to deliberate upon. And there are a number of presentations lined up in the parallel tracks for the panelists. And I'm very sure that the experts like Dr. Gupta, Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay, and on the comparative angle in a comprehensive way, the experience that Dr. Margaret Herbert brings to the table, and the courageous move by our judiciary through the leadership of National Green Tribunal at the first instance by people like Honorable Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal would definitely enrich this discourse and the final recommendations, which will be the outcome in another 3 hours. So thank you, panelists, and over to the conclave.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your fitting introduction to the themes of the session, and also your insightful comparative and transdisciplinary observations brought out. Thank you very much. We will now move on to speak about the environmental justice and constitutional law and right to air. It is my privilege to introduce Honorable Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal, sir, Chairperson of the National Green Tribunal, India. Having graduated from the Punjab University, Chandigarh, Justice Adarsh Kumar Goyal was designated as the senior advocate by the Supreme Court of India in 1999. He thereafter went on to become the judge of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in 2001, followed by his role as executive chairman of the Haryana State Legal Services Authority in 2005. He was the Chief Justice for 3 high courts, including the Punjab and Haryana High Court, the Guwahati High Court, and the Orissa High Court, before becoming a judge in the Supreme Court of India. It is indeed an incredible honor to have you grace this occasion, sir, and we are earnestly looking forward to hearing your views on the topic, environmental justice, constitutional law, and the right to air. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for all these remarks. First of all, I will like to thank and compliment Symbiosis Law School for organizing this conference on right to breathe clean air, health and environment related sustainable development goals. And this plenary theme on environment environmental justice, constitution, and right to air. I must say that this is a great initiative which we have taken on such an important subject. And this discussion is very, very important, very valuable. I was briefly hearing some remarks by Dr. Gupta, and also in another track, I was hearing for a few minutes another scholar speaking. I will like not to be at the moment, forget my role as chairperson of the NGT so that I can freely participate. I'm not in my capacity as chairperson of NGT. I may have some constraints, but as a freely I wish to express my opinion before all the participants and the dignitaries. So I must confess that scholarship which you all have, eminent professors have, the study which you have undertaken full time, and all systems which you have studied, my knowledge may not be matching to that. My knowledge is very limited compared to your studies. My expertise is basically in law or in interpretation or adjudication. This subject, environmental justice, constitutional law, and right to air, they are all interlinked. What is, after all, constitutional law? Constitutional law is a framework for upholding people's right or for people's welfare in any country. And that is justice. Our constitution starts with word justice. Justice, social, economic, and political, which includes every form of justice. Justice including means if it is not covered by these three concepts, it's an inclusive definition, means justice is the first thing. And it also includes economic justice, social justice, political justice. I don't think any part of justice is left out. That is the first guarantee the Constitution of India gives to every citizen, to guarantee justice. That is the object. That's the Constitution we have given to ourselves, to guarantee justice to everyone. Then, right to air, of course. Can you deny right to air? Will there be any justice? Will there be any constitution which says you don't get fresh air? So, the moment you are born as a human being, this is the first thing. And when you don't fresh air, you don't get air, what happens? The man dies. So, air is part of life. So, as far as theoretically, whatever concepts you dwell, it is very basic even to an illiterate person. You need not be knowing law. You need not study anything. As a common man, as a man in the street, anyone will say, can there be justice? Can there be constitution? When a person is not able to breathe fresh air. So fresh air is something which is considered to be divine gift to the people. And everybody is entitled. If there is no fresh air, this earth will not survive. That is the concern when the climate change was taking place. It was in 1972 when people realized. In our ancient writings, in our Vedas, this right to air is discussed. It's a basic thing. But in 1972 in Stockholm Conference, certain principles were articulated and agreed upon by the world community. Sustainable development. And then sustainable development is the key word. But then around that word, how to have sustainable development? Several principles have come up. It may be precautionary principle. It may be public trust doctrine. It may be intergenerational equity. It may be polluter pays. All these principles are there. So there is a fine balance of nature on the earth. That's why people are able to survive on the earth. If that fine balance is disturbed, the life will be very, very difficult. You have seen how difficult the life has been in the last 1 year because of corona problem. There is a virus in the air and you are all running away, all confined to the houses, all covering your noses, and people are dying. What happened in Bhopal gas leak? The gas is leaked into the atmosphere and thousands of people died. and the impact can still be felt. So how to this challenge, how do we face it? It's not a small challenge. It's a very, very, very serious challenge. Our problem in India, and maybe to some extent elsewhere, but perhaps more in India, is it's not a problem of law. We have plenty of law, very good laws, very scientific laws, very good judicial system. But then where is the enforcement? Just now you are talking, I don't want to digress. You are just talking, I'm giving a small response to, for just your information. Dr. Gurpur just now talked about the EIS system, that you are granting ex post facto clearance. Let me tell you, it's a very, very insignificant part of the problem. Because ex post facto, you grant it or you grant it before hearing, you conduct public hearing. It is all becoming a farce because environmental clearance is given subject to so many conditions which are ex post facto in any case, even today. Environment clearance is prior environment clearance, but it is subject to subsequent conditions being fulfilled, which nobody knows whether they will be fulfilled. You are talking reducing the period of monitoring from 6 months to enhancing to 1 year. But let me tell you on the basis of record, today it is 4.5 years in practice. That is the affidavit of the government of India because they say we don't have the machinery. So on an average monitoring is taking place once in 4.5 years, maybe even much more. And we have asked them to do it once in twice or twice in a year. They say it's not possible for us. We don't have that much manpower. There is so much competition. There is so much stress on economy. The government is so much under tremendous pressure of competition on economic front of generating employment. So this goes to the background, all these issues. They say people are dying of hunger. There's no employment. And then how do you compete with China? How do you import? How do you encourage your exports? So these issues are becoming theoretical. And fresh air is becoming a rare and rare commodity. Today, there is a news throughout India that ease of living, Bangalore is best, Pune is second, and Delhi is number 13. But I don't know, this ease of living is not dependent only on fresh air. Because if you come to fresh air, they say Delhi is 100 or 100 and below that, or even in Bangalore or Pune, fresh air is not always available. Or maybe comparatively it is better. Let me just tell you, there are 2,100 garbage dumps that is covering possibly every city, except perhaps Indore, some problem has been solved. And the garbage dumps are continuously generating smell and bad air. Is there anybody finding solution? Any law is required, any discussion is required. Everybody says rules are very much there, says that you can't have it. There is a timeline granted, timeline is over. And then it's a criminal offense. But who is committing the criminal offense? There are statistics. I don't know which statistics is correct, giving lakhs and lakhs of number of people dying. Some estimate 12 lakh people dying every year, some estimate less or some estimate more. Because of the air pollution diseases. There are large number of people catching the disease in lungs because of the bad air, particulate matter. There is pollution by dust, pollution by vehicles, pollution by crop burning, pollution by coal industries, or pollution by even crackers. So this is all against constitution. It's all against right to air. It's all against justice. But how do you check it? The real discussion perhaps required is awareness. Are you going to stand against it? You require organized group for standing against injustice. Merely enacting law will not provide you justice. Let me make it very clear to you. No NGT, no Supreme Court, no High Court can provide you justice when there is such massive or large-scale violation. The commitment has to be from everyone. Merely saying that, all right, you have a right. Yes, I have a right to clean air. Who disputes that this right is there? But where do I go to enforce it? Can I stand up in Supreme Court and say, yes, I am not getting fresh air? Are Supreme Court judges getting fresh air? What do? In Supreme Court judges' houses, all the noise is coming, all bad air is coming. What are they able to do? How they will give it to the people? It should be available. So this situation is extremely serious when we have a constitutional right or a legal right guaranteed under the Constitution, guaranteed under the judgments, guaranteed under the statutes, guaranteed under the policies. But then you have, in terms of statistics, public statistics, publicly accessible statistics, 122 non-attainment cities. I was not knowing the word, what is the meaning of non-attainment? And non-attainment is where, on an average, in the last 5 years, the air quality has not been as per laid down norms. There is an Air Act, Air Prevention of Pollution, Prevention of Pollution of Air Act is there, 1981. There is the Environment Protection Act of 1986, and under the rules, the air quality standards are laid down. But those standards are never met in the last 5 years. Is 122 cities which do not exclude any major city of the country. And there is a National Clean Air Program, NCAP. What the program says is, in the next 10 years, progressively, we will reduce air pollution. Then how it is a fundamental right to breathe clean air. If you do it in 10 years, that means what happens in 10 years? What happens to the polluter pays principle means the person who is generating air pollution must pay for it. Or the person who is suffering air pollution must be compensated for it. How do you compensate? People are dying, people are suffering. It's no offense. Killing is no offense. Killing by air pollution is no offense, because you can't determine the nexus between the death and the person who has generated the pollution. So these are very, very serious issues. All the solution which is possible is what you are doing, is interaction in young generation, being conscious. Our rights can be protected when the people who are violating understand their duty and responsibility. Or the government mechanism, enforcement machinery is very, very strong and upright. So these EIA systems, these regulatory systems, Air Control Act under the pollution control boards, we have found and recorded in the judgment, pollution control boards, they exist in paper and hardly they are able to complete the mandate under the Air Act. So it is not merely by enacting a law that the problem can be solved. About the noise pollution, you go to any marriage, the way in Delhi, I don't know in Pune what is the position, how the DJs are operated, and then your air noise control rules, they're just on the paper. Who is going to enforce? Who has guts to go to a marriage and say, no, don't operate DJ? So there are very, very serious problems. And fairness, yes. Justice, yes. Environmental justice, yes. Right to air, yes. Constitutional rights, yes. But then how to get them, I think let us focus on that. And for how to get them, we have to then go back to what Dr. Abdul Kalam used to say to every problem. The only solution which he used to provide is, don't think what is your right, but think what is your duty. Don't think what you can get, but think what you can give. So Mahatma Gandhi said, Vaishnav jan to tene chai kahiye jo peed parai jane re. Now here it is the reverse. We are not concerned with what happens to others. I must enjoy my right. If that is the approach, unless there is a paradigm shift in that approach, perhaps all this discussion, all the enactment of laws, all these judgments giving various rights will be on piece of paper. Students can study theoretical concepts, but then outside the college, when they go, they say, oh, it's only what I have studied. Whatever is happening is reverse of what I have studied. So you can go on making policies, but if there is no compliance, there has to be conducive situation created for enforcement of such rights by social awareness. That is the first thing. So I will not take more time. Perhaps I have already taken, I was given 20 minutes. I have perhaps taken 20 minutes. So I will thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and if I apologize if I have said something which is not to your liking. My idea was only to create awareness that this is the seriousness of the problems. Now for the last 3 years, I have been dealing day in and day out. And every day with disappointment, we find that situation is on the increase. And compliance of law is very, 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 very insignificant. So unless there is participation by the students and some people are really, really committed to prevent the pollution, we are going to face serious problem in this society. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for bringing your illustrious expertise to the table with that thought-provoking and compelling questions and enriching our discussion through your deliberations in law and environment. Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next speaker, this is a reminder that the participants may pose questions to any of the speakers in the chat box, which will be taken up in the question and answer session towards the end of this session. Now, to address the topic of green economy, sustainable food, and the right to clean air, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Margot Herbert, professor at Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Regina, Canada. She's currently the Canada Research Chair, Tier 1 in Climate Change, Energy and Sustainability Policy. With a PhD from the University of Amsterdam, Dr. Herbert was the coordinating lead author of a chapter in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Special Report on Climate Change, Desertification, Land Degradation, Sustainable Land Management, Food Security, and Greenhouse Gas Fluxes in Terrestrial Ecosystems in 2017-19. As an associate editor of the International Journal of Climate Change Strategies and Management of the Emerald Group Publishing and a review editor for a contribution to the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, Climate Change in 2020-21. On the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. She was also the scientific coordinator of the Task Force of Earth System Law and Senior Research Fellow of Earth Systems Governance Project in Delft, the Netherlands. She's also the editor of the International Environmental Agreement, Politics, Law, and Economics, and a committee member of the SSHRC Insight Grant Competition in 09 Geography, Urban Planning, and Related Fields in 2019 to 21. It is a privilege to have you at this session, ma'am, addressing the issue of green economy, sustainable food, and the right to clean air. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. If I can, I'll share my screen if you allow me. And if not, I can just speak to my notes. Okay. Perfect.
I think you should be able to share, yeah.
Yes, now I can. Great. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really wish I could be there in person. But today I'm going to speak for 15-20 minutes around the synergies of green economy, sustainable food, and the right to clean air. And I'll speak a little bit about climate change, and I'll draw mostly from the Canadian example because I am in Canada. Although I'll also draw from my experience with the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change and use that experience though and illustrate it with the Canadian example, especially around policies and laws and how we're addressing all of the components that I'm going to speak on, which is the right to clean air, green economy, agriculture, and land. So I had the pleasure of being the coordinating lead author on the special report on climate change and land that came out in 2019. So it was one of the special reports. They are along with the 1.5 report and Cruz report. And in this report, we were dealing with specifically land and climate fluxes, as well as policies, risk, and decision-making. So the report documented that, in fact, our temperature over land has increased 1.9 degrees Celsius since before industrial times. And our global targets in the Paris Agreement are in fact 1.5. So this is significant in the context of what has happened and what could potentially be happening into the future. Okay, my screen is going slow. Okay, so we're currently working on the 6th assessment for the IPCC, and I'm working in working group 2. And some of the new science that's coming out, some of the insights are that in the future with climate change, we're going to have increased stress, and specifically in relation to water and in relation to air, particularly due to fires in much of the world. And I'm not sure that this is the case so much historically in India, but in North America and Australia of recent times, we've had incredible fire hazards impacting our air quality, even all the way up here in Canada. The fires that were occurring in the United States and Arizona earlier this year impacted significantly the air quality all the way up in Canada where I live, and we saw emissions into our hospitals. So climate and air are really interconnected, and addressing climate change for us in Canada is a significant way that we're going to address air quality. And I know you might not be able to read number 10, but I'm currently writing for the IPCC around law and risk, and how law is actually a really important tool for addressing risk. And I'll talk a little bit further about that in the future of presentation, but the advancement of our human rights for our sustainable development goals is a way to address the complex problem of climate change and the intricacies of climate in relation to all of the sustainable development goals. So our window of opportunity for addressing climate change is closing, and the 1.5 and the Land and Climate and Cryosphere reports were very, very deterministic in this regard, that the carbon budget in the atmosphere is reducing. The dates for the carbon budget at achieving the amount that would allow us to achieve 1.5 degrees warming could be up as early as 2028, so almost 7 years from now, where we should be at net zero emissions and not generating any further emissions into our atmosphere. So the policies that we're talking about around the world aren't quite up to that speed. But there are different scenarios of climate change into the future, and these scenarios relate significantly to how much we address carbon in the atmosphere. So if you've watched the scenarios, the socioeconomic scenario 1 is the sustainability scenario that the 1.5 report was trying to achieve, where we have really addressed our emissions, but we've also really addressed our population growth. And SSP3 is actually the opposite, where we're not addressing our emissions, we're not addressing population. And SSP5 is a combination of burning all of our fossil fuels and trying to address sustainability. So what this slide is showing you is that it is possible to achieve our climate goals with future scenarios, but they have very different trajectories. And SSP3 is one that might result in increasing inequality throughout the world. So we really have this emissions gap where we need to address carbon in the atmosphere, and we need to address it soon. And to do so, it's going to require significant reductions. And Canada, we have our eye on this, especially because I'm sure you're all aware, we are an oil and gas producer. And this is significant in the sense that we'll have to transition away from being an oil and gas producer. So where I'm from, we've already shut down our coal-fired power plants. And what this is showing you is our nationally determined contributions around the globe. Currently, with the 2010 commitments, we are not reducing our emissions. What we need to do is reduce them and achieve a net zero in order to get to that 1.5 degrees warming for the socioeconomic pathways. So many countries have committed to this net zero emissions in the future. You'll see some of them here. Canada passed an act in 2020. We've also passed an act around the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, which has significance in Canada. We've had a carbon tax for quite some time. The provinces are, especially mine, Alberta and Saskatchewan, are fighting with the federal government in court. It's now at the Supreme Court of Canada to determine whether it was constitutional for the federal government to do so. And we actually expect the ruling today or next week. So very, very soon from now. So when we think about reducing emissions and law and policy, it's become very, very clear that we need to do it in all of the sectors. So we need to not only do it in electricity, but also in transportation with electric vehicles and hard places like agriculture. So the Land and Climate Report was really talking about agriculture. So this is a Canadian initiative around what are the things that we can do to do this reduction, and bioenergy is a huge one. So I heard your illustrious opening speaker talking about what to do with all the landfills or the garbage dumps, and bioenergy is actually an option to change garbage into, burn it to have electricity and heat, but take the emissions and put them into the ground. Yes. Electrification of vehicles, but to do that, we have to have net zero clean energy production. And there's only limited options, solar, wind, and nuclear for this type of thing. Hydrogen is something that we are actually working on in Canada, a new emerging technology, especially for big transportation. So this is from the Land and Climate Report, and it gives us a sense of what we need to do in order to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So because we are so close to expending our carbon budget, we actually need negative emission technology. So we need huge forests. We need to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the ground with carbon capture and sequestration. But in many of the models, the amount of forests and the amount of CCS that we need would take up the size of India. So where in the world are we actually going to be able to grow a forest that big and then burn it and put the carbon into the ground? So that's the inherent change that is envisioned in these climate models that we need to actually consider. And Canada, by no way, shape, or form, is close to this. But Saskatchewan, where I'm from, is the home of the first coal plant that took carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground. So it actually was our oil and gas companies that financed this technology. And now in Alberta, they're building an entire carbon capture sequestration trunk line in order to use carbon in some industrial processes, like making steel, but then not allow the carbon into the atmosphere to actually put it into the ground. So we've done this for about 30 years in Saskatchewan. We also have a lot of wind. That's me sitting on the first wind turbine. I was the lawyer that was negotiating the agreement, so was involved in that. We need to think about our homes differently. So we need to think about electric vehicles instead of regular vehicles and how they become a battery for our wind and solar overnight. So a whole changeover in thinking. The financial disclosure laws for our biggest corporations in Canada and the United States and Europe are starting to have to disclose risks associated with climate change and what their plans are to achieve net zero by 2050. All policies and laws interrelate. So this is the forest fires that happened throughout the world in 2019. So in the Land and Climate Report, we started to write about how important fire policy was in relation to air quality and the right to clean air, because many of the countries like Australia hadn't kept the money in employing their fire bureaucrats to manage fires. They had an incredible fire event in 2019, resulting in the loss of a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and a lot of biodiversity loss. Agriculture is something as well. So this is Canada, and it shows you in red where agriculture is emitting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So policies and laws around this are important. So this is from the Land and Climate Report, and it gives you a sense of the laws and policies that actually incent agricultural producers to keep carbon in soil. So it's improved land management, improved livestock management, and there are laws and policies that surround that. This is the bioenergy and BECCS. So if you go to the Land and Climate Report and you look at what I was talking about, the size of India, you could actually see that in a cross-chapter box in chapters 6 and 7. I'm going to. So the mix of policies is really, really important. It's not just one like the carbon tax or one like invoking clean energy through solar and wind. It's actually a very complicated, intricate mix of policies that are important and risk-sharing mechanisms such as insurance for our very small agricultural producers who have a hard time weathering the storm of droughts and floods. And in chapter 7, what we did is we looked at, again, all of the policies that support these types of processes, advancing net zero emissions, retaining carbon in our land, and put them together into a table for consideration. And one of the biggest takeaways was the idea that it is our entire food chain that we need to think about, the carbon on our plate. And we have choices in this regard with how much land we're allowing agriculture, how much land we have in food, and how much land in pasture. So I think I'm almost out of time. So I'm going to kind of bring it back to the legal sense because this is a legal conference. So a colleague of mine from the United States and Australia are writing a book on Earth system law, standing at the precipice of the Anthropocene. And what does that mean in a bigger theoretical sense? And what it means is, as lawyers, we need to start putting our hat on and thinking about law in the context of time and our responsibility for future generations. Thinking about law in the context of space, and in Canada, thinking about our obligations internationally as exporters of oil and gas, and thinking about our obligations in the non-human world to other species. So with that, I'm going to finish. I think I'm just about out of time, and thank you again for the opportunity to present, and I welcome any time for questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your insightful address and also bringing your technical expertise to this vital discussion on air pollution and sustainability. Thank you very much. Now to move on to our next speaker who will be addressing the forum on environmental emergencies en route to SDGs. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Anil Kumar Gupta. resilience and sustainability strategist, a professor at National Institute of Disaster Management, India. He's also the former director of the Institute of Environment and Developmental Studies in Bundelkhand University. With a PhD in environmental science, impact assessment, air quality, impact on plants and human health, Dr. Gupta was the assistant director of the Disaster Management Institute and the program director for the Center of Excellence on Climate Resilience. He's a principal editor in the Disaster Resilience and Green Growth Springer Nature book series. He's also the professor of policy and strategies, DRR and sustainability, head of the ECDRM division, the nodal officer for central ministries, international cooperation, S&T, consultancy, and private and public partnership. It is truly an honor to have you address the participants this evening, sir, on environmental emergencies en route to sustainable development goals. Welcome.
Thank you, Lasha, and thank you, Symbiosis Law School, for inviting me to share some of my views at this occasion. Very good afternoon to each and everyone here. And it is indeed a matter of great happiness that you have chosen this very, very important topic for this discourse. And I was listening to Justice Goyal, and his remark has been very, very pertinent. Initially, I had a plan to use a PowerPoint presentation, but as this is the evening time and I moved from my office and I missed to copy my PowerPoint, so I'll be speaking around a few points that I have noted, and I found that those are important for the consideration of the participants present in this forum. As this discourse is running around the issues of policy and law, so the first reflection that I will have on policy and law, that past 15 years or so, we have been discussing a lot about air quality and its challenges. As against to that, before that, in fact, for quite a long time, again that 15 years, we were not talking much about these issues. Why? So there is something also important to introspect, that as Justice Goyal also referred to Stockholm Conference that was in 1972. So it's very, very long journey. Almost we are going to have a period of 50 years. So we have been discussing a lot about environmental issues, and there was also a kind of very significant paradigm shift. 72 conference was on human environment, whereas 92 conference, 1992, it was on environment and development, and then 2002 it was Earth Summit. So the title of the UN conference itself tells us something, that how the key thought process undergone the change. Then the focus has been on major catastrophic events for quite a long time, because those were the major disaster events which were affecting people and killing thousands of people in single events, within India also and in other countries also. That is the reason these lower order risks like air pollution, water pollution, solid waste issues were never given a front seat. Even now also, the pollution related issues, whether it is air pollution, whether it is any other kind of pollution, is never a I would say that key news are the front news in any kind of media, whether it is the visual media or the print media. What is the reason? So we need to look at this also. When it comes to law, Honorable Justice rightly pointed out that there is no dearth of law. Yes, if there are certain lacunae, we can improve, we can do amendments, it's fine. By providing in Article 21, the Constitution has already provided all the rights because it is right to life with dignity. So, what is important when we are talking about law? That, and very soon, I would like to add this also. The next pollution disaster that the humanity is going to face globally and also in India, that is of electronic wastes. And then probably the overall discourse of environmental legislation will have to undergo a very serious transformation, as in next year's time there are going to be disruptive changes in the technology and disruptive changes in the lifestyle of all of us. And as we have already witnessed in past 10 months period itself, that how our life has undergone very serious level of changes. So this is important. Now coming to the key topic, as I am working in the area of disaster management, I see environment and disaster linkages in three phases. The first is that the degradation of environment and ecosystems, where the atmospheric component also comes in. And when we talk of atmospheric component, then it directly relates with the climate change. As the previous speaker was referring to the special report on climate change with reference to land. So environmental degradation leads to aggravating hazards and vulnerability for disasters. And that has actually now it is a known fact that disasters are on rise in terms of number, in terms of impact. But on the other hand, we have been able to reduce the number of deaths in each disasters, or averagely. Second thing, which is equally important, but given less focus or has not been highlighted, how disasters affect the environment. As the justice was also referring to, that whenever we talk of air pollution, there are lateral contributors to air quality degradation. Not only direct emissions from the vehicles or direct emissions from the industrial operations or fossil fuel burning. There are a number of contributors. And in many parts of our country, there is also a problem of natural dirt. And the previous report that was on land. And recently, we in India hosted in 2019 the COP14 of United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. So it calls for kind of a holistic viewpoint. And the third aspect of environment disaster relations is that whenever there is a kind of disaster situation, whether it is earthquake, whether it is a fire, whether it is floods, tsunami, cyclone, any kind of major catastrophe, the focus is on saving life of the people. So search and rescue is the prime concern, and often the environmental concerns are compromised. So the last 2 points are seldom thought, that how disasters cause impact on environmental quality and environmental resources. So these dimensions have been rarely thought of when we talk of environmental protection or environmental quality management. Then another aspect, globally we are witnessing an economic slowdown past 15 years or so, again the same period, past 15 years. Entire world, including India, the economic growth rate is not increasing. Whereas for achieving sustainable development goals, it is said that we need on an average, a growth rate of around 12%. So we all know that we are not going to it is not easy to increase the economic growth rate. But what is the reason? And when we talk of these issues, we talk of the underlying causes, which are very important. But there are rare focus, particularly rare systemic focus on understanding the underlying causes of these kind of failures or these kind of slowdowns. I would like to go back to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report of 2005. And I often relate that report, the outcomes of that report, with the economic slowdown that is going on globally, because it had warned of the consequences of the global ecological slowdown. Actually, what is happening, that most of the problems we are discussing in silos, we are discussing in isolation from other issues, whereas the things are connected, things are interconnected. So this ecological slowdown, a slowdown in the ecological productivity globally, is also one of the major contributor to the economic slowdown globally. So that is an important dimension. And how disasters and environmental emergencies are contributing to that. Environmental emergencies are the new face of disasters. As most often when we talk of disasters, we refer to earthquake, fire, these kind of things. But the number of disasters that have taken place, particularly past 10 years or so, are of the nature of environmental emergencies. For example, this coronavirus pandemic also is originally an environmental emergency. It has started from human intrusion to the wild gene stock, and then it turns into a localized health emergency. Then it spread and crossed the border and engulfed the entire world. Then forest fire, then floods. There are a number of other climatic environmental extremes like heat, cold, wind storms, dust storms. And this year, we in India also face a major locust attack. So these are the new phases in disaster risk reduction or disaster challenges given by the environmental emergencies, which we never thought that we'll have to deal at disasters. This coronavirus pandemic also we had to deal as disasters. So these are the kind of new lessons for us to think that how environmental emergencies are having multiple impacts and further degrading the sink potential. Sink potential of the environment is the carbon sequestration potential, or the potential to absorb these harmful or obnoxious gases, which are otherwise emitted. So many times we are discussing only about the emission, but we should also take care that how this sink is declining. So that is important, and sink is declining by human activity, but also because of impact of disasters like the Orissa cyclone Fani. There has been huge degradation and uprooting of the forest resources, including the water bodies, damage to water bodies. And we know that water and forests are the carbon sinks. So we need to start relooking at more holistic way when we talk of air quality, because air do not have a boundary. We cannot draw a boundary line that air in the North Delhi or the East Delhi or something like that. And we put a boundary and we say that no. And we have witnessed it, that whenever there are dust storms in Rajasthan, the Delhi weather is affected. Whenever there is a burning of crop residue, the Delhi weather and Delhi fog issues are there. And we had to declare the health emergencies because of these. So declaring pollution related issues as emergencies or as disasters are the new dimensions in disaster risk management that probably we need to understand. Now, there are one or two more points I would like to refer to here. As this discourse was going on justice. So many times when we talk of human rights, I often say that human rights cannot be separated from environmental rights, but it has two faces. Protection of my human right or enjoyment of my human right should not lead to violation of other person's right. So that is important. I have a right to buy a motor car and ride it, but it doesn't entitle me to violate another person's right of clean air to breathe. So this is important. Then when we talk of SDGs, the issues are also related with the dichotomy of the resource efficiency. That is very important. I refer to the COVID-19 pandemic again. We have been asking each one of us that you wash your hands 20 times, 20 seconds, and more often you take bath whenever you go out and come back. On the other hand, the water resources department and groundwater boards department, they say that water is a scarce resource. The groundwater is declining. Many places on the map it's shown as red, so critical areas. So that presents a dichotomy that we, for improving the quality of life of the people, for improving the life expectancy of the people, for improving the better health of the people, we want these kind of resources, and we need to harness our environment more and more. But on the other hand, things are going towards a critical side. So how to address this dichotomy? That puts a question in our journey towards achieving SDGs, which is very, very important aspect. And the last point, as Justice Goyal was also referring to, the responsibility of each one of us. So here, there has been some researches by some of the scholars on willingness to pay kind of things. How many of us are really willing to pay? Most of us are really willing to enjoy the free electricity, free water, free access to natural resources. And whenever any kind of taxation or cost is put, it is considered as anti-human right, anti-developmental, anti-welfare. So in a state of affairs where freeship is considered as the fundamental right, how can we visualize that people will be coming forward and with willingness to pay for environmental protection or for clean air or something like that? So this is also an important dimension. And when I say willingness to pay, not only by the general public, that is also investment by the government. Only having a number of institutions is going to create institutional jargon and overlap of authority. Now we have new institutions dealing with air quality. Already there were the institutions existing. How the things are to be implemented and why the things are not being implemented, probably we need a systemic research. I would say that it should also not lead to putting blame directly to some particular institution or some particular person, because there are a lot of lateral causative factors. Sometimes the institutions and persons are bound to violate these laws. So we also need to interrogate on these dimensions, that what make people, what make institutions not to obey these regulations or to follow these regulations. The dimensions may be associated with the lack of technology, lack of incentive, lack of capacity, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, and so on and so forth. So these are some points I thought that I should share at this forum, that how the air pollution and air quality issues have direct linkages with environmental emergencies, and looking at the impediments that our journey towards the SDG has to face. So thank you very much for inviting me to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your incredibly perceptive policy and technical deliberations on environmental emergencies that are faced by the world today. And you have brought forward fascinating interconnections between environment and ecology and economy. So thank you very much for that rich discourse that you brought forward. Now, to discuss on the challenges in promoting best practices on preventing air pollution, we have our last speaker for this session, Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay, founder and managing partner of India's first environmental law firm, Enviro Legal Defense Firm. Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay is an advocate at the Supreme Court of India. He has also established the charitable arm of the law firm through the Environmental Law and Development Foundation. Having started his professional career at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, India, at the Center for Environmental Law, Advocate Upadhyay served as an environmental and development law expert to some of the most well-known international, multilateral, national, and state institutions, including the World Bank, the IUCN, the FAO, the UNDP, to name a few. He has been practicing environmental and development law since 1993 and was the Duke University Global Fellow in Marine Policy in 2001. He has been part of the drafting committees of several forest, wildlife, and biodiversity related legislations, both at the national as well as the state level. It is an honor, sir, to have you address this forum today on the challenges in promoting best practices on preventing air pollution. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Lasya, for that rather long introduction. I know people have been really listening to everyone and probably tired by now. So I'm sitting between the last session and myself. Thank you, Symbiosis. Thank you, Professor Gurpur, for this invitation. Let me quickly dive into the subject itself. I know much has been said and you all have been extremely enriched by the learned speakers. The good thing about lawyers is we don't have to be experts. We can speak on anything. Just give us a brief. And thank you, students, for waiting so long. I hope it's not a credit related stay. So I hope you enjoy the last session. Very quickly, as I said, I'll jump into the subject itself. I've been dealing with some of these issues in court, and the National Green Tribunal, you heard Justice Goyal almost sounding extremely sad about the state of affairs. And I can understand that pain because we've been trying to argue a lot of these issues in court and getting some very fascinating orders since 1914, actually, when the NGT was established. And I think immediately after a year or so, apart from whatever was happening in the Supreme Court, we went ahead with one matter and on the issue of air pollution. An advocate, in fact, named Vardhaman Kaushik, who went and I sort of argued that matter. And we found that there were at least 20 things which the National Green Tribunal said that can be done. And I'm not a theorist or an academic, so I would just jump onto those very specific points that were made, on the issue of stubble or scrub burning, on the issue of vehicular pollution. How do you need to disaggregate vehicular pollution in terms of what is essential services, what are commercial vehicles, what are vintage vehicles, what are private vehicles? How do you disaggregate that and then draw up a strategy? How do you look at thermal power plants differently? How do you tackle with dust and construction activities? How many people should actually sweep roads? What kind of automation that is required? How do you handle brick kilns? How do you handle hot mix plants? How do you look at basic things like traffic alignment? How do you look at blinkers? How do you align the signals on the road? How do you look at road alignments in cities? How do you handle encroachments on public roads and walkways? How do you handle parking? How do you look at capping and pooling of vehicles? How do you look at enforcement ban of this 10-year of diesel vehicles, which are now banned beyond 10 years and 15 years of petrol vehicles? How do you handle waste burning? How do you look at waste oil burning, for instance? How do you look at burning in landfill sites? How do you look at public air purifiers? How do you handle and strengthen the regulatory monitoring agencies? How do you look at your basic PUC systems? If there is some, corruption there, how do you handle that pollution under certificate that all of us go and get it from a gas station sometimes? How do you look at technology improvement? How do you look at quality of fuel? How do you prevent adulteration of fuel? How do you develop carbon sinks and afforestation and green belt development? How do you look at emergency measures? All these odd and even that became so political in Delhi. How do you look at simple things like DG sets? How do you improve the quality of your DG sets? How do you handle firecrackers and how do you balance the religious sentiments? Who's talking about the scrapping policy of vehicles? What are the incentives to not use polluted vehicles? How do you handle the ambient air quality based action plans? So if you look at a host of orders that you see, when you look at a court order, the trouble is again, which I think Justice Goyal was alluding to, who's going to do all this? So it's not about the law. It's not about very nice judicial orders. But I think the issue is rather systemic. And I think that's where we need to focus a little more, which many speakers have alluded to already. The first and foremost is, can the nodal ministry of, which is the environment ministry, can this deliver the goods for the people of India? I think that is the first moot question. Is the MOEF itself, does it have the requisite capacity to really look at the magnitude of air pollution problems? I think that's where the problem starts with. Is it powerful enough? I often talk to ministry and they always find themselves overburdened when you talk to a ministry of road transport or the ministry of coal, the ministry of industries, ministry of petroleum, ministry of micro and small medium enterprises, ministry of agriculture, the urban development. They find themselves too weak to move these mammoth ministries who are supposed to be the engines of growth for this country. So when it comes to the Ministry of Environment, it's like this little stepson somewhere sitting out there, or daughter, which doesn't have the requisite power to move around different ministries to ensure that they all come together. Now, if you look at the policy, for example, if you look at the National Clean Air Program, very nice words, collaborative and participatory approaches, that should involve all the central ministries, all the state governments, local bodies, other stakeholders. They form the crux of the program. But does it really happen on the ground? How do you link up your entire program with the smart cities program? How do you look at these 122 non-attainment cities that was being talked about earlier? How do you increase your number of monitoring stations, not just in the urban areas, but also in the rural monitoring systems? How do you really raise awareness and capacity building? How do you strengthen capacity building initiatives? How do you set up certification agencies for monitoring equipments that handle air pollution prevention? How do you really do your source apportionment studies? How do you really make a particular sector liable depending on such source apportionment studies? How do you really emphasize on enforcement? Where are the gaps in enforcement? I think we really need to break down all these problems that I'm talking about into small doables. The trouble is we try to achieve the holistic, we try to achieve the perfect, which is just not there. So let's start small, let's break it down to doables, and let's deliver on the ground. I think that's the message we need to really give. And in that, I think the primary driver is whether the science itself is driving policy. And this is where I have a lot of questions to all the scientist friends of mine, that we are still not sure, or at least quite sure, about the source apportionment as far as air pollution is concerned. Every time you take up a sector, you find that, I'm only 0.2%, or I'm only 2.1%, I'm only 4%. Where is my liability? Who's the bigger player? Who's the bigger polluter? And somehow we haven't been able to crack that in terms of our strategy. Now we get very excited when some study says that, we are doing very badly. I mean, one good example is the Lancet study, which many of you may be familiar with. And that gave a very, very scary picture. I think Justice Goyal was mentioning 1.24 million deaths in India in 2017, which is about 12.5% of the total deaths in India, attributable to air pollution. 0.67 million from ambient particulate matter pollution, 0.48 million from household air pollution. So these data is really scary, and they may be true. But how do you really ensure that this scary data turns into something which is practicable? How do we really, as I said, break it down to doables on the ground? I think this is the real issue. If you look at the institutions that we have, I call it, how do you tackle egos and turf wars in curbing air pollution? You have the National Green Tribunal's own understanding of what should be done. You have the Honorable Supreme Court's understanding and methods and processes of how things need to be done. You have the EPCA, which is the Environment Pollution Control Authority, which is now which is now just been disbanded recently. Their own mandate of how air pollution has to be looked into. We have task forces. We have the centralized monitoring committee, which has been constituted by court orders. We have the Supreme Court GRAP, the Graded Response Action Plan. We have an NGT GRAP also. We have the CPCB coming to the courts saying that my state pollution control boards are not working. They're actually suing the state pollution control boards. So there's a huge trust deficit by institutions themselves. And now the latest is the Commission on Air Pollution for the National Capital Region, at least, and surrounding cities, with a nudge from the Supreme Court, which was threatening another judge to sit on the issue of air pollution. So I think these egos and these turf wars have to come together and ensure that there is one plan, simple plan, doable plan. Now, where is the role of the private sector? Is it just limited to technology? And every day, I mean, as a lawyer, I find every day investors coming in, can you do my case to promote a particular technology, whether it's in, on prevention of air pollution. The politics of technology itself needs to be understood a little deeper. I think the lobbies and the interest groups that talk about technologies, again, is something that needs to be carefully understood. It ranges from air purifiers to monitoring stations to different kinds of plants, which are supposedly going to be good for the air pollution prevention. Where is the incentive to genuine players? In my understanding, there's a lot of disincentive at the moment, because you go and set up a plant. Just an example of waste to energy plant, which just got cleared last week for the Supreme Court for the city of Agra. We had to struggle for 4 or 5 years just to get a simple clearance to nobody disputes that Agra was a dump yard with 500 million tons per annum kind of garbage, but nobody is willing to set up a waste to energy plant. And when these units come in genuineness or whatever, it takes them 5 years to lay a brick. So where is our system to reward or to incentivize genuine players? Where is the space for common citizens? When you're talking about government and interaction, when you're talking about scrapping policy for vehicles, where is the debate on that? Where is the capping policy for vehicles? Where is the debate on that? Which are the incentives that you're going to provide to a common citizen to scrap his vehicle and get another vehicle perhaps which is needed? How do you really look at issues of congestion fees, for example? How do you look at the issue of environmental cess, for example, post GST as well? How do you look at simple interaction with the government? There have been so many little initiatives. For example, the Hawa Badlo app we have from EPCA, the Swachh Delhi app we have, Sameer by CPCB, Samadhan Delhi Can. There are many of these little apps, but how many people use it? How many people even know about it? So I think there is a lot to do on simple things, on interactive systems, so that people get part of the solution and not become the part of the problem. How do you tackle illegality with, as Justice was lamenting actually, how do you really tackle illegality with such minimal capacity of regulators? There's an illegal waste oil burning, there is waste tire burning, there's illegal pyrolysis plants, there are emission checks which are completely pollution driven, corruption driven, I would say, fugitive emissions not being checked properly. So where is the answer? Is the answer complete shutdown? No, perhaps not. I think we need to really, as I said earlier also, break it down to make it simple so that the result is in front of people. We talked about the Air Act of 1981, and I think Professor Gurupurkar very rightly started out with that point. Why are we living in 1981 legacy? This is 2021, for God's sake. Let us look at our legal framework differently. I disagree with the fact that we have a lot of laws. I'm sorry, the law that we have is a 1981 vintage. We need to re-look at that law. We need to make it adaptive to the current situation, the current problems, the 20 problems that I mentioned earlier in my presentation. Perhaps look at those real issues and work out solutions so that results are for everybody to see. and perhaps we'll actually have a right to breathe fresh air. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your justice and judicial deliberations on environmental concerns with air pollution that you have communicated with such conviction. Thank you very much for that address. Now, although we do not have too much time, we will move on to a short question and answer session, as there are quite a few questions in the chat. So I would like to invite Dr. Dhanaji Jadhav, Associate Professor at Symbiosis Law School, Pune, to kindly moderate the question and answer session.
Thank you, Lasya. Thank you, panelists, for brilliant address and valuable inputs. More particularly, there were a couple of questions which the audience have put in the chat box. I have already one question, it has been answered by Professor Margot. Just let me check the questions in the chat box.
The candidates who have asked the questions may also feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the question, because we have been facing a little bit of a technical difficulty here. The questions might not be visible to everyone.
Lasya, it seems that there is some issue with my chat box. It has disappeared since I dislinked. One more questions which I would like to ask Professor Sanjay Upadhyay, Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay, sir, in respect of India's stand in as contributing but differentiate responsibility to the carbon emission. As after Copenhagen Conference and Paris Agreement, this conflict, it has been sharpened more particularly in between the developing countries as well as developed nations. So how do you see these conflicting views in between developed and developing nations in respect of carbon emissions, and how it can be tackled with the climate change?
Probably need another session and another conference for that question. But let me try to respond. I think it's a larger political debate. I look at it, this whole issue of common but differentiated responsibility in two ways. One is what we posture to the world and what we do in-house. I think when we talk to the world, we have a very valid argument that we make to the world that we need to adhere to the common but differentiated responsibility, and polluters who have who have done pollution in the past must pay for what we are suffering today, and we have a right to development. So that global posturing or global stand that we've taken is absolutely right. But I think there is equal amount of responsibility, and I think that is where Justice Goyal was also trying to allude to. What happens to our duty, our responsibility? And I think there's a lot that we need to do, and then we'll have a better stand, a better moralistic stand, better political stand, and better economic stand to go to the world and say, we've done our best. Now it's time for you to do your best. So I would look at it more in that sense to answer your question. Thank you.
Recently, if you see the Make in India movement, it is really a welcome venture, more particularly to strengthening the economy of the country, as well as to provide the job employment to the youth. But at the similar point of a time, it weakened the stand of India, more particularly in respect of climate change. How do you see the balance in between?
Yeah, so as I said, if you look at the way we are responding, whether you look at our INDCs or if you look at the parameters, I think we're not doing too bad in terms of the 1.5 degrees that was being spoken about earlier that we hope to achieve. And we have to understand that we are a very large and diverse country. And the initiatives that we have to take at the policy level, and when it moves down and trickles down to the ground level, there's a huge gap or there's a huge timeline that is required. And I think it's all about how do you really work towards that and ensure that we are doing things rightly, we are developing our institutions properly. We do have a systemic response properly. I think that's the way forward, you know. In terms of our responsibility and the way we have told the world, I don't think we are doing too bad, in my humble view.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your expertise and expert view. Thank you, Lasya. Now, almost there are no more questions in the chat box.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you to the speakers and the panelists as well. With this, we come to the end of the plenary session, and I extend my gratitude to all the esteemed speakers and the active participants for such an enriching session. I would like to remind all and urge all the participants to kindly fill in the feedback forms that have been circulated by mail to all. Your honest feedback will help us to grow and also organize these conferences with excellence. So we really look forward to receiving your feedback. With this, we will move on to the valedictory session. To deliver the closing remarks on the conference and also the outcomes and resolutions of the conference, I would like to once again invite Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, Fulbright Scholar, Director, Symbiosis Law School, Pune, Dean, Faculty of Law, Symbiosis International Deemed University, and Conference Director for this conference. Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, ma'am.
Good evening, esteemed panelists and all the other delegates and the audience. It's my pleasure to share with you that this conference has come to an end, like any other happy event coming to an end. It cannot last forever. I'm sure that even though it's online, you would have made new connections and friends, as well as you would have gleaned a lot of knowledge in last 2 days in terms of half day or 1 day at the end. I heartily welcome Ms. Reshma Rana, who is the project director from Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute. Madam, it's because of your organization that we have been able to take up this very, very timely issue. And we have been able to bring so many dignitaries. The friendship concept and collaboration concept enhanced by the Institute has enabled us to host eminent personalities, including today's Margot and yesterday David Boyd and many others. So it has been truly international, true to the spirit of symbiosis between countries and experts. Now, the quality of paper presentation also has been excellent, as you would see later on, the kind of those who came out with flying colors. It would be a testimony to the quality of the conference. I'm very happy to place before you on record that we had received about 30 papers. Out of them, only 19 came ahead to participate in different tracks, the 4 tracks, you know, yesterday and today. And then we have had the pleasure of, looking at some of the deliberations and the outcome. As we have promised you in our proposal, we are looking at outcome in the form of publication of these papers. We are very sure that since they have come out as the best from across the country and outside the country also, there are Canadian papers, there are papers from European Union, there are papers from India, which is a continent in itself as a home to 1/5 of the world's population. So plenty of papers from all parts of India. Now coming to the outcome of the conference in the other side of, aside from the publication, the report of the conference going into your website and the photos, etc. And already the social media campaign that has been going on will not only center stage our collaboration, it will center stage the cause. So this conference has come out with very, very valuable deliberation and recommendations. So the expert speakers who have been with us have given us some very important recommendations. I won't be able to list out all of them, but I'm putting that recommendation in a structure. First of all, that as it was told yesterday by David Boyd in one of the chat box responses, that law is the one which is going to balance the stakeholders in terms of those who want to have forestry or plantation drive and those who want to ban private jets. So rule of law is the backbone. It is the law which integrates all these concerns and interest groups and stakeholders. So our approach to environment also needs to be integrative. And today, particularly in this context, the foremost element which sustains is air. So clean air in terms of an integrative, balanced approach to environment vis-a-vis the rule of law and policy is what we are coming out with in terms of recommendation. So the experts who have come from the field of science, geography, law, policy, within law again, judges, advocates, academics, transdisciplinary researchers, all of them have come out with certain recommendations. So this recommendation would certainly pave way to a very comprehensive integrated legislation, as one of our resource persons, Vice Chancellor Shantakumar from Gujarat National Law School said. He runs the Center on Development and Law. So environment development binary, which has been there from the Brundtland report time itself, which has again seen the Rio summit and now the Sustainable Development Goals, will be having this coexistence of development with environmental justice. So here it is not just ritualistic approach to environment, it is going to be a serious issue. Therefore, classic problem in these laws in terms of implementation should be emphasized more. Secondly, if we emphasize, then even Canada could reach a greater height by aiming at European standards, which are much higher than Canadian standards in terms of particulate matter. India could touch the Canadian standard, which is much higher than Indian aim of reducing the particulate matter and air pollution to the pre-2005 levels, whereas Canada looks at pre-1996 levels. So image of India as the worst garbage could also be changed if we are able to look at the waste management dimension. The other issues, related issues. For example, we have the Clean Air Act in the US, which is the foremost country in getting the Clean Air Act. Whereas we have Canada as well, we have India as well. Now, Clean Air Act has got one limitation, it doesn't integrate. So what it could integrate comes from different ordinances in Canada, different ordinances in India. So when I'm looking at consolidating the outcome of the conference in terms of these challenges and issues in these different jurisdictions of the world, particularly India versus Canada, we could look at, first of all, clean air monitoring to be strictly implemented and then remedies to be done. Then more manpower to be given, because just now the Justice Sir told how in India environmental impact assessment periodically has not been happening because of this lack of manpower or human resource, trained human resource. He says, in effect, what is supposed to be done 6 monthly or 1 yearly is being done 4.5 years. So that is the second recommendation. Third is interconnection of health and interconnection of health, energy, economic policies like taxation into the clean air, right to breathe clean air fulcrum. So how do we do that? For example, everything like technology, investment, alternative energy resources to be built into a very good tax regime and very good incentivizing system and penalty systems as well. Secondly, investment made on health could reduce if right to clean air is supported. It has been proven by research, especially in the US. Prior to the Clean Air Act and post Clean Air Act, the households which were spending too much on healthcare related issues reduced, they came down in their expenses on this. So health related dimension and investment. Then in terms of how behavioral changes by the citizens, we can introduce the household way of using energy, household behavioral changes, public transport system changes, identifying cycling zones and blue zones in urban management planning, sustainable food processing practices and agricultural practices, Sustainable industrial practices, because industry is the major contributor, 57%, agriculture with the stubs, etc., and ozone layer depletion, resulting in low food turnout in terms of sustainable food practices. Could be looking at protection of the ozone layer, reduction of the greenhouse gases, in sector-wise separate committees and teams and policies. Waste management to be done, because the garbage is one which is causing a lot of air pollution as well. So coming to specifics of this, as I already told you, development environment linkage with Shantakumar sir's recommendation, extensive recommendation in terms of effective implementation of existing international law principles by Professor Desai, national principles by the latest panel, last panel that we have had. Dr. Sairam Bhatt talking about public health and environment linkage to be brought in national policies and legislation. Dr. Prakash Rao talking about innovative technology to reduce greenhouse gas emission. So the industry which is encouraging it, the industry which is adding more greenhouse gases could be based upon polluter pays principle. And then India, when it recovers from COVID-19, to be led by renewable energy resources, especially thermal based approach to be reduced, and more solar and other renewable energy resources, e-vehicles. Transportation needs overhaul in the line of how Canada has done. Another point that we would like to highlight here, based on the recommendation, is the comprehensive human rights approach. Then environmental law, human rights connection. ILO talking about how renewable energy resources can create millions of jobs. So more economic development being linked to that, and the policies to take that integrated approach. That is also a human rights dimension and development dimension. 7 key steps, as David Boyd said: monitoring air quality, assessing sources of air pollution in an integrated manner. Because I already cited or quoted that Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson, the Nobel laureate, who said that environment has to be seen as a comprehensive, total aggregation of elements than in a fragmented manner. We can't create a disjunct between different elements of environment. So when we are looking at agriculture in terms of food production, we should also look at the nitrogen based fertilizers causing ozone layer depletion. So this is the way the integration in our approach to be sustained by the backbone of rule of law is what is recommended as the outcome of this conference. I once again thank all the resource persons. I hail their and commend their contribution across the panels, all the speakers in tracks, all the presenters in the tracks who have put in the sweat and blood, and our own in-house team, especially with the expertise of Dr. Rupal in IP and science and law, our Dr. Mohanty in international relations, who have been pivotal in proposing this idea to SICI. And SICI, in terms of recognizing this among so many bidders, Professor Raj, who is from the science background as well and scientist family, his contribution, and all others who have worked in the backdrop in every way, who have made this possible. And we hope that all the participants will carry home the message and they will become effective agents of change in their own individual life, making behavioral changes in the household and in public life as well. So I welcome each and every one of you, and we hope to reach it to the concerned within no time, maximum of 2 weeks, to the policy bodies, to the institute, to the concerned environmentalists and the activists and lawyers and other experts who have been working here with us as resource persons. Welcome, one and all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that summative, really good summative closing remarks that have been delivered, and also viable outcomes and resolutions. It really exhibits the high level discourse that has taken place at this conference. Thank you very much. To deliver the closing remarks by representing the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, we have with us Ms. Reshma Rana, Program Officer of the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute. Ms. Rana is pursuing her PhD from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and before joining the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, she was working as a document officer at the Department cum Center for Women's Studies and Development in Punjab University. She has worked with various organizations ranging from private to government institutions and has had 15 years of experience. She has many publications to her credit, published in national as well as international journals. Welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, could you please unmute yourself?
Usually we forget to unmute ourselves when we just start speaking. Well, thank you and a very good evening to all the organizers and presenters and of course the attendees who are listening to the deliberations of this conference. And I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Shashikala Gorbor and her team for organizing this wonderful conference on right to breathe clean air. It is essential so that our coming generations get clean air to breathe, which is essential for good health and naturally. So I was just reading, because I am not expert in this area, so I was just Googling and I was reading, and I could find that there is a 2015 Paris Agreement which set a global goal to reach net zero emissions in the second half of the century. And most of the countries, they have announced that they will be achieving a net zero emission by 2050. Though seems to be a difficult task to achieve because the pollution level is very high, and in current scenario, indeed, it's a requirement, and we all should join our hands and share equal responsibility towards a clean environment. And in the morning, yesterday morning, we had Professor David Boyd from University of British Columbia, who was the chief guest of the inaugural yesterday. So I was just reading his paper because I was surfing on the net. So as per his paper, over 95% of the world population lives in regions where air pollution exceeds the standards that WHO has set for pollution. And if we talk about Delhi, and here usually it's more than 700 micrograms per cubic meter, whatever is the measurement for the pollution, and that exceeds, I mean, it's above the guideline that WHO has given. It's just 10 microgram per cubic meter, and it really seems to be unbeatable dream. I think it's really very difficult. So we have to work hard to achieve that. And air pollution is one of the biggest global environmental and health challenge, and people must be protected by the legal standards that this conference has actually covered all the themes. It was a very comprehensive and covered all aspects ranging from significance, legal perspective, practices, policies, approaches, etc. And I was listening to you that the resource person that you had invited for your conference, they were almost from all kind of areas that is related to the air pollution. So it was a good collaborative effort where experts from India, Canada, Tanzania, US shared their views on the topic. So my best wishes to you all for your academic endeavor in future. With this, I would just say, and it was a good effort, and we are happy to support this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your collaboration, and we look forward to more collaboration with you.
Sure.
Now for the theme-wise declaration of the best paper in the conference, I would like to call upon Dr. Aparajita Mohanty, ma'am, Associate Professor at Symbiosis Law School, Pune, to moderate this.
And the winner for the best paper presentation in Theme 1, International Law Perspectives on the Right to Breathe Clean Air in Light of Sustainable Development Goals is
Vaibhavi Gangadhar.
The winner for the best paper presentation in Theme 2, Global Best Practices in Tackling Air Pollution is
Miss Arushi Guha and Sindhuja, as well as Mr. Leigh Haggins.
The winner for the best paper presentation in Theme 3, Comparative Law and Policy Approaches to the Right to Breathe Clean Air is
Miss Anusha Arif.
The winner for the best paper presentation in Theme 4, Frameworks to Establish and Enforce a Right to Breathe Clean Air in India is
Miss Nivedita Chaudhary.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for moderating that. And congratulations to all the winners in all the 4 themes that have taken place. I would now like to call upon Professor Kshitij Naikare, Deputy Director, Administration, Symbiosis Law School, Pune, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Asya. Hope I'm audible. Good morning to all our Canadian friends and faculty members listening to this, and a very good evening to the students and faculty members listening to this from India. Congratulations to the winners and also to the participants. As we come to the end of such an enriching and thought-provoking conference, I would like to propose a formal vote of thanks. Although vote of thanks are usually not the most looked out for events in any table program, today's vote of thanks is very necessary, imperative, and extremely special. At the very offset, I would like to thank the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, led by Dr. Prachi Paul ma'am and Ms. Reshma Paul ma'am, for sponsoring this amazing initiative and envisioning a conference which is the need of the hour. In contemporary times, during the entire pandemic, I'm sure all of us would have been a part of zillion such conferences. I mean, at one point of time, there was a pandemic of conferences. But I don't think any other conference would have come even close to the kind of relevance which this one had. I would like to then thank the top management, starting with Dr. Mujumdar sir, who has always been a guiding visionary, not just for us, but for every single academic event and exercise that happens and is staged in this university. Being an academician himself, he always has a knack for such ventures, and we are really grateful, thankful, and feel blessed to be a part of an institute which is led by somebody like Dr. Mujumdar. I would also like to thank Dr. Vidya ma'am and Dr. Rajni Gupta ma'am, who have always supported us in our ventures by giving their approvals, by giving us words of encouragement, and always encouraging the zeal and enthusiasm of the faculty and staff of SLS team. I cannot actually end this vote of thanks without thanking our enigmatic director ma'am, Dr. Shashikala Gurpur ma'am. This program is incomplete without her lioness's share contribution in this entire exercise. She's always led by example and has always pushed us to do things which sometimes even we do not believe we can achieve. Like Martin Luther King used to always say that in his very famous speech that I've been to the mountaintop. And he used to say that to motivate his followers and show them the word that is kind of waiting for them. So Dr. Gurpur ma'am is actually our Martin Luther King, who motivates us to always punch above our weight. She's always been ahead of her times in her thought, in her kind of vision, the kind of paradigm she thinks in, whether it be in the courses that we have over here, the kind of conferences that we arrange, and the kind of academic discourses that we run. Without her vision, this conference obviously wouldn't have been possible. I would also like to obviously thank Justice Adarsh Goyal sir, Dr. Anil Kumar Gupta sir, Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay, and Dr. Herbert for guiding us with their insights. Some of the things that Dr. Anil Kumar Gupta sir said or mentioned in his speech were so interesting that we didn't know about these things before this particular conference. At least I personally didn't know about it. I would also like to thank our Canadian and American resource people who joined in enthusiastically at odd hours. Like I was told that at this point of time it's 7 a.m. in Canada, and I think it's really amazing that they have shown the kind of enthusiasm to be a part of such an exercise. I would like to thank the faculty at Symbiosis Law School, Pune, led by Dr. Rupal ma'am, Dr. Mohanty ma'am, Dr. Sujata Arya ma'am, Dr. Manika ma'am, Professor Raj, Aditi Mane ma'am, and many others who have worked behind the curtains to make this unique collaboration successful. I'd like to especially thank Professor Lasya for hosting this entire thing right from the minute go till like the last minute. And it is really amazing that we have such people with us. I cannot actually end this without thanking the IT team led by Balish sir, Amit sir, and Zia sir, who throughout this entire conference and even before that have come before time and have left long after the last person has left to make sure that this event technologically kind of runs successfully. In these difficult times that we're actually living in, it's our IT teams who have held the academic fraternity together and made sure that the academics continues even across continents. So a huge thank you to our IT team. And personally for me, it was literally like a kid in a candy store with so much of knowledge at disposal, deliberation happening, and policy discourses available. I personally feel extremely blessed that at such a young age of such a juncture of my academic career, I got to be a part of such a conference. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming and joining in this amazing exercise. And with this, I formally announce that this particular conference is kind of over. Over to Professor Lasya.
Thank you, Professor Kshitij. And thank you to all the speakers, all the participants for your active participation. I would like to once again just remind everyone that the feedback form is posted in the chat. A sincere request to kindly fill the feedback form immediately while the impression of the conference is still upon you. And we come to the end of the conference, so I would like to thank one and all. The participants may feel free to leave the call now. Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma ma'am. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Lasya.